Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Career Choice Series webinar, In-House and Private Government Attorneys. The Career Choice Series is designed to help you choose your career path. Whether you're a law student, young lawyer, or transitioning attorney, find out what it's like to work in various practice areas and the best way to position yourself to get there. The Career Choice Series is brought to you today by ABA Legal Career Central, Law Student Division, Young Lawyers Division, and the Section of State and Local Government Law. The Section of State and Local Government Law is the premier association for lawyers involved in urban, state, and local government law and policy, whose members include lawyers in private practice who represent countless government agencies across the country, in academia, the judiciary, and government lawyers. The Young Lawyers Division is here to help new lawyers navigate the early years of their career and law students prepare for life after law school. The Law Student Division has just introduced premium benefits, which includes a savings of $250 on Bar-Bree Bar Review, $25 off West academic casebooks, and a legal ethics bundle that includes a free Model Rules of Professional Conduct e-book. Upgrade to premium for $25. Sign up today at abaforlawstudents.com/go-premium. ABA Legal Career Central is a career center that offers both career development resources and a job board for law students, lawyers, and other legal professionals across all disciplines and career stages. Today's moderator is Liz Stone, Managing Director of the Dubin Group, a legal search firm based in the Bay Area. She's a former litigator and currently performs stand-up comedy at clubs throughout the country. She is a board member of ABA Legal Career Central. Liz, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm very excited to introduce our panelists for today. Let's take a look at their bios. We have Adriane Dudley, who is a partner at Dudley Rich Davis, LLP in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. Adriane represents entities seeking government economic development benefits such as tax exemptions, and she serves as outside counsel to government agencies and public corporations in their operations involving contracts, development, legislation, and corporate governance. We also have Bill Scheiderich, and Bill has worked as in-house counsel to various Oregon cities and public service districts since 1980. His first specialty was labor and employment law, which grew to include land use decision writing and defense of challenges to those decisions, all aspects of municipal finance, and prosecution and defense of other municipal enactments in state and federal trial and appellate courts. Adriane and Bill, we are really excited to have you here today. I'd like to start by hearing an overview of what your practice is. Adriane, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us what your practice is and just give us an overview of your work?
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me, Liz. I'm excited to be a part of the panel. My practice is especially interesting because I'm in the Virgin Islands. And because I'm in the Virgin Islands, I get to do a lot of different things. And living in the Virgin Islands means that I do general work for local government agencies, but I think my most interesting part of my work is that I represent the public corporation and private operation for the cruise dock and cruise shopping mall here in the Virgin Islands in St. Thomas. That's really fun. It's a 24/7 job. I'm on call all the time. That means I'm getting calls in the middle of the night. I do everything. I also represent local, international, national, and local companies that want to apply for and receive exemptions from taxes. And I'm general counsel for agencies and for companies.
Great. And Bill, can you give us an overview of your work?
Sure. I came to Oregon mostly to go to law school in a different part of the country than from where I grew up, in central New York, and in fact was originally thinking of law schools in the northeast coast, but was convinced to come out and see the country here, and it is beautiful around Portland. I'm not there any longer, but it was nice. I got interested in law because of some work with the Audubon Society in central New York trying to get the state legislature to pass a bottle bill, and it occurred to me that my efforts might be better spent actually either in the legislature or as a legislative aide than being a volunteer for the local society. So after a brief period of time working in a personal injury practice, I found a job in local government, and that evolved to being a lawyer exclusively for local governments, which in my case have been cities, fire districts, and what in Oregon and Washington are service districts, meaning and municipal government entities that run the water service or run the sewer service and so forth. So in practice itself, that means I'm available to anyone to consult with. I don't have named clients. The whole organization is the client. Research and writing, though, anything that occupies significant resources, my resources, require authorization typically by very senior management or elected officials just as a control measure. And most of my work actually revolves around writing regulatory ordinances and helping implement them. Labor and employment issues, which come up all the time in the larger organizations. Land use, which in Oregon and less so in Washington is heavily regulated here on the West Coast. Written decisions are always required, and almost always the decisions are controversial and are appealed through multiple levels. And finally, construction contracts, whether it be bidders' qualifications, sometimes disqualification, or issues in managing the project as they go along.
Thank you. Bill, can you tell us a bit more about your career path and some of the keys to breaking in for anyone who might be interested in this type of work? Okay.
Okay.
Bill, if you could talk to us about the key to breaking into this path and also...
As to career path, well, I started in personal injury, and that didn't translate too much to local government work, but with a couple of exceptions. One is that the personal injury firm also did a lot of labor work, represented longshore workers and a number of other unions. And so I got at least a basic introduction to federal and state labor law, less so employment litigation. And the personal injury work gave me some knowledge of medicine and diseases and conditions, which is something that's handy to know in employment law, dealing with those unfortunate employees who have to be given leave without pay or workers' compensation claims and so forth. The start, though, was typical, and that is typically fairly fresh out of law school. The easiest entry into municipal law is to act as a city prosecutor in those cities that have municipal courts. So you learn trial practice, nothing wrong with that. You learn evidence, which is, of course, going to be useful in a civil practice. And you get to know personalities. And as time goes on and you become known and trusted in the organization, you'll find openings where you can develop an area of expertise or practice that you prefer. You'll get to know the organization, certainly, and its personalities, which will be useful later. And ideally, they'll get to know you and to trust you. And trust is a very important thing to have when you're in-house counsel and have people doing all sorts of things that you need to be on top of.
Ironically, this is Adriane. Ironically, I had a similar career path by going to the National Labor Relations Board right out of law school because I liked labor and employment from the management side. And I went with one of the management board members to his private practice where I learned other areas of private practice so that when I moved to the Virgin Islands and jumped into becoming a Department of Justice prosecutor and got lots of trial practice, I was ready for private practice when I did that after a few years.
Great, thank you. Adriane, can you tell us about what a day in the life is like for you with the work that you do?
Sure. The first thing I do is I check the email. Then I check my to-do list, and then I prioritize the work on it. I try not to sit at my computer all day. I prepare contracts and memoranda of understanding. I follow follow up and return all of my telephone calls. I do a lot of legislative lobbying, so I have to check and see what legislation is pending that I may have to call a senator about because it's going to impact my client. But before I do any of that, I look out of this gorgeous view that I have into the harbor to see if it's going to be a heavy cruise ship day. Because it's a heavy cruise ship day, that means traffic, that means potential incidents, that means a lot of calls from the cruise companies into the port manager that I represent, and that's going to also have a lot to do with my day. And then the usual, writing, researching, reading. I'm kind of senior. I've been at this for 40 years now, so I don't do a whole lot of legal research. I have associates and a law clerk and interns to do that. Lucky me. But the hands-on, face-to-face stuff I do myself. And Bill is right about trust. People trust me, and they trust my knowledge of the territory, and they trust my knowledge of the law. But it's funny how what I do today is so much like what I did when I started in practice, which is, having a deliberate method of getting started. Even though your desk is covered with paperwork, you can find what you need to do in the middle of it. And I guess the most important thing is having a to-do list. But if you're coming out of school or you're a young lawyer who's just graduated and been in a job which makes you unhappy, I strongly recommend that you try to become a generalist as a law clerk in a firm or in an agency where you're going to get a wide breadth of experience if that's possible.
Great.
And join the section of state and local government.
And we'll get to more on that in a bit. Bill, I'd like to hear from you about a day in your life. Is it similar to Adriane? And if not, what is different for you?
It's a little bit dissimilar only in that when you have a local government client, very typically they don't require strict billing by quarter hour, tenths of an hour, and nor do you have to find, as sometimes is the case in private practice for government clients, that you have to sort of bill it in a general category. And in general category, I would include how I start my day, which is reading appellate decisions, if there are any new ones worth reading. National news to the effect that they're warning me to be able to warn my clients of forthcoming federal regulatory changes, which are certainly coming fast and furious in the current administration. For instance, Fair Labor Standard Act regulations, which are very much affect any client with a lot of employees. I read specialty sites if I have the luxury of the time to do that by way of particular areas of law, recent developments in that, condemnation being one of them. That's one where I have to keep up on the national practices and other areas of practice. I then read emails, respond as and when needed. I'm not a great believer in responding to emails. I'm one of those who disables my reply all button. I recommend that to anyone. And especially if I get an email that's either obscure or that it's tending into an area where disclosure of that email, always an issue with a public client, corporate client. Disclosure of that email could put some people into big trouble. I will not reply to the email. I'll get off my chair and walk and see the person, or from what I'm doing now from a home office, I'll call them and make sure the call's not being recorded. You might think attorney-client privilege would prevent disclosure. I wouldn't rely on that because there might be a email string there that didn't involve you that will have to be disclosed. Then there are always long-term projects to move along. Regulatory ordinances take some time to draft. In Oregon, land use staff reports can be very critical in how they're written because they have a standard of proof to be met when they're challenged, and they often are challenged. And finally, staff meetings, which can be by telephone, but my practice has been to make sure I know why I'm being asked to attend, and I always ask for follow-up or takeaways as to, okay, where do we go from here, and what do you expect of me before we proceed or before we meet again? And here again, I'd recommend that to anyone.
Thank you. And now I'd like to go over some of the pros and cons of your practice. And Bill, I'll start with you. Can you tell us something that you love about your practice and a challenge that you face in your work?
Sure. As an in-house counsel, you get to work with a dedicated group of people, very knowledgeable people, not all of them dedicated or not all of them knowledgeable, but you have go-to people. And what that means is that when something happens that requires a detailed or dedicated or a long-term development of a response, you don't have to start up by reconstructing how you got there because you're seeing these people every day. Chances are either you know that the issue is moving along or arising in the organization, or if not, you know exactly who to call and say, in so many words, so what's this all about and how come this and how come that? And I've seen in so many cases where private retained counsel, which sometimes has to be the course of action because you have to admit the limits of your own expertise, private retained counsel will have to spend quite a few expensive billable hours doing the same thing because they don't quite know, except with your help, who to contact and to get up to speed. The other desirable parts of the practice that I have is that you do have some role in making public policy. You can never tell that to the elected officials. Believe me, in an interview, you never want to say you want to make policy because you'll be shut out of further discussion right there. They consider that their unique territory. But you do have a role. You advise on what's viable, what's not, or as with, I liken it to a medical practice, informed consent. You say, well, if we go this route, you realize we might be in court for a couple of years on the issue of whether we gave them sufficient notice, due process in some cases, of such and such. So in that sense, you sort of push the client to making an informed decision on public policy. And last but certainly not least, you're not expected to work evenings or weekends except when you feel the need to. So you don't have senior partners there on a Saturday morning taking notes as to who showed up and who didn't. Maybe Adriane does that. I'm just joking.
Right. And I'm going to move you along because we're a little tight on time. Can you tell us about one part of your practice that is challenging?
Local governments are usually short-staffed, so you can write a 20-page regulatory ordinance on fees that must be paid by utilities occupying the right-of-way, but you may have only 1.5 staff members in the finance department who have no idea of that subject area and who, frankly, are going to look to you to pretty much be the enforcement mechanism, something you didn't really want or didn't think is your role when you were drafting the ordinance. So you've got to be well aware of the limits of your resources, the client's resources.
Got it.
And finally, not finally, you can also fall out of grace when you perhaps repeatedly have to tell elected officials what they don't want to know. That's a real severe limitation on being in-house counsel.
Got it.
You're still there after telling them what they don't want to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Adriane, can you tell us something that you love about your practice and something that is challenging about your practice?
I love learning about the business in which my client operates. And by doing that, I can give sounder and a broader vision. I can give sounder advice and have a broader vision of precisely the context in which issues arise. I would reflect that what Bill says about his practice is very true for mine, since a great deal of it is administrative and political. But I really, really enjoy getting to know my client and the administrators with whom I work. And I guess my passion is legislative policy. And fortunately, in a small town, I can say I had something to do with the policy without a lot of pushback, although there's a risk inherent in that, as Bill points out. The other thing I like is that because it is private practice, I do have some control, although it does involve, as I say, being on call 24/7 and working some weekends. No, I don't sit at my desk checking in who's in and who's out. They come and go as they need to.
Thank you so much. And Adriane, I'd like to turn now to the top 3 skills that you think someone needs to become a government attorney. Can you just tell us what you think the 3 most important skills are?
Sure. I think, first of all, that you have to be able to stand on your feet and have a really comprehensive knowledge about national and local news. And as Bill said, be able to keep up with appellate decisions in the particular area in which you're employed or in which you want to be employed. Second, I think you have to have a friendly personality that can get along with anyone. You're going to run into some very difficult people, and you're going to have to be able to swallow your pride and be able to get along with all of them. Some will be easy, some will be hard, and you'll find people who will stab you in the back. So you need to be on your guard for that as well. The third thing, and this is probably the most important thing, and this is true across the board in the profession, you need to write and speak clearly. And that means you've got to be able to reduce a complex issue to 3 easy-to-understand Sesame Street style points. If you can't do that, that means you do not completely understand the issue. This is the skill that employers look for, whether they're in the public or the private sector. So you've got to have a comprehensive knowledge of national and local news with respect to the issues. Second, you have to understand the law in the area in which you practice and be able to get along and explain it to others in simple style. And third, you have to have a personality that's easy to get along with and that will work with anyone, even those people who make you very, very frustrated.
Well, thank you. That sounds like not just good advice for being a government attorney, but good life advice in general. And Bill, can you tell us what you view the top 3 skills to be for someone who would like to be a government attorney?
I'm going to seg on Adriane's comments. You should develop an expertise in 1 or more topic areas and be confident of it. Again, as I mentioned before, you may be in a position from time to time, not too often we hope, of telling elected officials or senior management what they don't want to hear, but you've got to make sure you have the confidence to stand up to your position if challenged. And on the other hand, you want them to be confident in that decision that it will withstand scrutiny if going further. So another skill, you can't be unapproachable. You can't be seen as taking sides or to the effect of no point in talking to him. He's already told them that they can do such and such. You've always got to be willing to listen. Or the downside, if you don't, is that you can be ostracized, or even worse, you can be ambushed by a legal crisis that developed because you were left out of the loop because people didn't want to talk to you and hear an opinion they didn't want to hear, or hear an opinion they already sort of knew was coming. So you've got to keep yourself in the loop to be effective as in-house counsel. And third, as I've mentioned before, know your staff resources, know the go-to people. That includes going to people the insiders who may have a different take on how a situation developed or what the opposing party's own take is on that issue, so you're well prepared to answer it, consider it, and maybe compromise on it.
Thank you. And now we're going to turn to what people might be surprised to know about your practice. And Bill, I'll start with you. Is there anything that people would be surprised to know about your work?
For one, I grew up in very much a working class household and started work in a union labor law firm, personal injury and labor law, for about 2 years as a clerk while I was in law school, and then a year as an associate. Didn't like the work because of the caseload, but and inability to really deliver to so many clients in workers' comp cases. That's always tough to do. But what I did find, it's not difficult to work for management. You don't have to feel bad that you're now representing the employer or the management side in labor relations. It can make you more fair, much more able to see the other side's viewpoint. After all, it's called collective bargaining for a reason. Another sort of hint is that if you work for a city that has sister cities, you get involved in that organization, it is a great way to travel. Most of my overseas travel in the last decade was to visit sister cities where you're often treated as visiting royalty. It's really amazing how generous and friendly these folks can be. And it's a great way to see the country with local guides who take you to restaurants, show you your way around, or put you on buses. And finally, you can help out charitable causes in unseen ways. I'll give you one example. We were trying to condemn property, the city was, with the intent of then handing title to Habitat for Humanity. I'm sorry, we weren't condemning property. We were vacating right-of-way, a little variation on that. And I found that the property owners who have to consent up to a certain point, owners of X percent of acreage, X percent of the number of properties, were not going to give their consent. And because I was interested personally in helping out Habitat for Humanity, I found that staff was using the improper way to calculate those acreage counts. And when I advised them of that, we just barely squeaked by with a sufficient number of consents. And so I was able to pat myself on the back by way of delivering what the city council, this wasn't my own idea, what the city council wanted to deliver, and I found a way to do it because I was determined to get that right-of-way vacated so that Habitat could build to the density they needed for that development. So you can have some fun, so to speak, from time to time.
Great. And Adriane, what would people be surprised to know about your work?
Well, first of all, that I don't do it on the beach, although I do get to look out of the window at the water. I think that an interesting part of my work that I didn't mention was the fact that I'm a mediator, a certified mediator and a certified arbitrator. And I think people would be surprised to know that I get to mediate a lot of really vicious divorces. I don't know why. The hard ones always come to me, whether they're family matters or divorce matters or others. And I volunteer with our local legal services and then our unrepresented undocumented immigrant children and represent them in court. And that is a very valuable service that I perform, but it's very rewarding to me. I think that people would be surprised to know that this little old lady in tennis shoes does that kind of thing.
I love it. And we have time for a couple questions that we got in. The first one, Adriane, I'll direct to you, and it's just a quick question about advice for new attorneys in the Virgin Islands for anyone who's interested in working there and how that advice might differ for someone who's in the States.
Well, actually, we have become a much more flexible jurisdiction in terms of young attorneys who pass the bar. If you have practiced up to if you've taken a bar within the last 3 years and you've been in private practice or public practice for that matter for 5 years, you can in a fashion waive into the Virgin Islands bar. There are several opportunities. We do have 1,000 members of our bar, which is quite unusual for a population of 100,000. But you can clerk for our judge. There we have 2 district court judges. We have maybe 10 superior court judges. We have 3 BI Supreme Court judges with 2 more to be appointed. Clerkship is a really good way to find the law as well as get to know the entire legal community. There are nonprofits that have attorneys. All government agencies have attorneys. There is an Attorney General's office. So there are many opportunities for attorneys who would like to come and work here. Another good thing is to work with nonprofits as a volunteer. In and outside of being a lawyer, because that gets you involved with people who need lawyers. And so I would, and of course you would come to members of the American Bar Association who are already connected to the young lawyers, and we have a very active young lawyer segment here.
Great, thank you. And one more question about the definition of government attorney. Someone was wondering if that includes lawyers working at an administrative agency. Adriane, how would you define what makes someone a government attorney?
Well, I think in the first instance, you have lawyers who are working in-house with government agencies. They're certainly government attorneys. I think how you define yourself is your paycheck. If your paycheck is issued by a government agency, then you're a government lawyer. If your paycheck in private practice is issued by a government agency, that makes you a private government lawyer. So I think that definition is probably fairly simple, and you should not necessarily label yourself a quote-unquote government lawyer. I think you should label yourself a lawyer who works with a government agency or a series of government agencies, depending upon the source. Very often, an office of an attorney general or a state's attorney will assign attorneys to various agencies, or will have you in-house doing trial work. So you may want to call yourself a government trial lawyer. And you may be a prosecutor or a defense lawyer, all employed by the government. So that label, government lawyer, covers a lot of territory. So you may want to call yourself a government lawyer or not, as the situation requires.
Thank you. And one final question for each of you. Adriane, I'll start with you. We'd just like to know how being involved with the ABA has boosted your career.
Well, actually, it's been fantastic. It's given me a national visibility that I probably otherwise would not have had. I have served on the Board of Governors, and that has certainly given me a lot of visibility. I've been in the House of Delegates. I still am. I've been chair of a section. I'm sitting currently on the Standing Committee for the Federal Judiciary, which I have to tell you is absolutely fascinating. The idea that I can network with attorneys all over the country and the world has given me the opportunity to do some really exciting and interesting work that I probably wouldn't otherwise have been exposed to.
Thank you. And Bill, can you tell us about how ABA involvement has boosted your career?
Yes, as a source of legal information, current developments, and sort of in-depth analysis of various issues that arise in the practice, it's pretty much unmatched by any other source that I can think of. It's also been great to get a national perspective on what can sometimes seem like a uniquely local issue. I'll give you an example. The sort of infamous, not condemnation, but takings case of Dolan versus City of Tigard concerned the construction of a hardware store along a creek where the city, as an exaction for the development permit, land use permit, sought a 15-foot wide bike path along that creek that was, caused the hardware store owners to have to move their building back by almost an equivalent amount. They didn't build right on the edge of the creek, or didn't plan to. Anyway, I walked by that site every day as I was working in a nearby suburb of Portland, so well familiar with it. And I can tell you that every municipal lawyer in the state of Oregon had their own take on what that Supreme Court decision was about. And only by hearing persons from other states in the section with their own take on it did I realize there are much larger issues that many in the local bar seem to have overlooked or didn't think were that important. So getting a national perspective on things unique to your city or your state can be quite handy. And the state and local government section has been the source.
Great, thank you. Well, Adriane and Bill, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and sharing all of this very helpful information about your work. We really appreciate it. And Emily, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Adriane and Bill, very much for speaking with us today. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. Please be sure to check out our website at abalcc.org for some upcoming free career-related webinars. I've got a few up on the screen from the Career Choice series, which is the series we're in right now. And we've got a few more coming up in the Career Advice series as well. And please be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And also, please be sure to complete our short survey before leaving. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you.